they have this desired state. They like to be down. Things are like smoked, they like to be up, so they go up. So Aristotle had this view of objects containing their properties, not the universe having laws. Right? That's kind of the way he viewed it. Aristotle, a lot of people say, very interesting, he did the most to promote science in his age, but he also did the most to hurt science over the following 10 centuries, because people stuck with his view in not doing scientific science. And actually, if you go ahead to Galileo, if you look at the battles that Galileo fought, Galileo was fighting for science. The church and the pope that he was working against was, and the philosophy they took were stuck in Aristotle's view, which was consistent with the scientific view of general science of the day. So it was really Aristotle that, all his views went all the way up to Galileo. It's like fascinating history. I'm getting off topic. Love that question. But so Aristotle, in this idea, he had this idea that there are species, right? And each species has some idea. There's a squirrel, there's an idealized squirrel in some divine place, and every squirrel is an imperfect instance of that ideal. So there's Aristotle's. And then next, understanding, which I don't know where this came from, but this is sort of common knowledge. Change in inherited traits over successive generations of the population. Just observation, and this is what we call evolution in general. Right? Evolution, at its most general state, is this. People talk about evolution as fact. Often, I should know the author's name. Fatih Numa wrote the evolutionary biology, the most popular evolutionary biology textbook. In the beginning of the book, he states, evolution is a fact. Well, evolution is a fact is a tricky statement. If you're talking about evolution in this sense, which is what most of the book is about, the textbook is about, then it is a fact. We have this is a process, it's a fact. If you're talking about neo-Darwinism as all life came from a common ancestor, that's not a fact. That's a hypothesis, right? That's not something we can recreate, that we've had the observations for, right? So that's a hypothesis. So people kind of dispute that. Anyway, so late 1800s, two views that challenged Aristotle's thinking about species. And actually, it's interesting. Other branches of science got out of the Aristotle line of thinking long before biology. Biology tended to get hung up for a longer amount of time about species. So late 1800s, Mendel, who was a monk, Catholic monk, but I'm not sure what designation or relation to Catholicism, but he was a monk studying the pea plants, developed laws for traits and inheritance, and how variation comes through the inheritance. And so this is definitely Christian thinking, looking for laws and repeating the experiments, so you can see how the Christian worldview comes through, and that's what Mendel focuses on. At the same time, of course, Darwin, he came up with what he published on the origin of species, and his thesis is that offspring have variation. The most fit of the various offspring tend to survive and do the most reproduction. And that process of the most fit reproducing the most quickly is what we call natural selection. And he published this idea on the origin of species. He went in this, I have the first part here called natural selection, but then he went beyond kind of what I say here. He said this is how all species came about, hence the name origin of species. And so that was his contribution. His big thing was to say that this natural selection is what caused the origin of species. For a long time, Darwinism became the sort of the thinking for a couple of decades. Mendel's work was lost. Nobody read it. But then it was rediscovered a couple decades after Mendel had done his work, and there was this conflict. And in the early 1900s, the two were put together and made what we call call neo-Darwinism, or the modern synthesis of Darwinistic evolution through natural selection with Mendelian genetics. So putting the Mendelian genetics, these laws for how genetics work, together with this Darwinist idea of evolution, give what we call the modern synthesis, or neo-Darwinism. And in this process, with a little bit of understanding of genetics, we have mutations provide that variation, and then selection picks the best out of the various versions of the species that we have. And so we have this mechanism for evolution. Right? Mutations give us a bunch of variety. The most fit reproduce the most quickly, and if you just think about it, if you keep repeating that process, you'll get better and better at whatever it is you're looking at. Okay. And part of that is this last part, which I tacked on, and over time this process produced all genomes and thus life. Now, you could accept all of this and not really accept the last part. The last part is really what we call the primary axiom before. So I kind of wanted to separate that a little bit from neo-Darwinism and the processes that go on. The idea that all life comes from that is more of a hypothesis, or a lot of people take it as an axiom. Right? It's not something we can reproduce. We can't reproduce pieces of it in the lab, so it's taken as an axiom. Okay, so what is selection? Right, so there's two parts to this equation. There's mutation and then selection. So here's a very simple example. I've got 3 populations of bugs, and they have slightly different genetic makeup. This population of bug produces at 3% per year, and so there's my differential equation if you like that up there. This population of bug produces at 4% per year, and there's the equation of that population. And that last bug over there, he produces at 5% per year. So after a little while, if I correlate the size of my bug with the size of the population, we're going to get more of the one that produces the most quickly. And we assume that there's only enough food to support some total amount of these bugs. Right? There's only enough room for 1,000 bugs or 1,000,000 bugs altogether. So it's really relative population. So even though this guy is reproducing, relative to how quickly he reproduces, this guy is going to decrease in his population to him. So we hold the total amount the same. Okay, so that's natural selection. Does that make sense? So what we just did here is actually called the fundamental theorem of natural selection, which fundamental theorem of natural selection is based on this plus a little more. So, okay. We'll get to fundamental theorem in just a minute. So if you understood that little diagram, you understand the fundamental theorem. But we have to talk a little more about this to get to why the fundamental theorem is called the fundamental theorem and why it's so important. So, early 1900s, there was this philosophical, this scientific war. And this is how science works. And people sometimes get upset and they argue, like, this is true, no, dark matter is this, no, you're a fool. But whether we're talking dark matter or evolution, this is the way science works. And we love it. I mean, that's why, I love it. That's why scientists are scientists. Right? This is just how it works. People who think something should be a certain way, and dark matter is, exactly what, or evolution, I pick dark matter. And it's not evolution, it's less philosophically tied. Evolution has philosophical ties for all of us. I'll raise my hand, and we should all raise our hands. If we have a philosophy, which we all do, even if we're not aware of it, it has ties there. Okay, but 2 schools of thought, and they were at war with each other. It was a biometric school, which viewed genetics as understandable by statistical metrics and evolution as a Darwinian gradual process. So you have a large population, you measure a mean standard deviation for that population, you measure how that mean and standard deviation changes over time, and it's a gradual thing, that it's measured over a large population. You need lots of things to take your statistical measurements. And in fact, a lot of what is now called engineering statistics was invented by Ronald A. Fisher, to develop this school of thought. Actually, I'll talk about Fisher in a minute. Fisher was brilliant, although he was wrong. Some stuff we're going to talk about. I love Fisher. I love reading Fisher's work.